Marcus Reed, I think you just saved my company. The voice said from the other side of the door, low, strained, and completely out of place in the quiet hallway of a worn apartment building just before midnight. Marcus stood still for a moment, his hand frozen on the doorknob, wondering if exhaustion had started playing tricks on him. The hallway outside his apartment on the third floor smelled faintly of old carpet cleaner and late-night takeout drifting up from the street below. Through the thin walls, he could hear the hum of an air conditioner somewhere down the hall and the distant rumble of traffic rolling along Jefferson Avenue. But the voice outside his door was unmistakable, calm, controlled, and belonging to the last man Marcus ever expected to see standing outside his apartment. Marcus slowly opened the door, and the fluorescent light above the hallway flickered once, casting a pale glow over the tall figure waiting there. Daniel Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Technologies, a man whose face appeared on business magazines and financial news channels, now standing in a quiet apartment corridor wearing a dark overcoat and looking like someone who had been driving for hours without stopping. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Marcus's eyes moved from the expensive leather shoes to the tired expression on Whitmore's face. The CEO's tie was slightly loose, his hair not quite as perfectly styled as it appeared in company photos. He looked less like a billionaire executive and more like a man who had just discovered something that refused to let him sleep. Marcus leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, still holding the knob. It's almost midnight, he said calmly. Most CEOs don't visit maintenance workers this late. Whitmore let out a quiet breath that turned briefly visible in the cool hallway air. You're not just a maintenance worker, he said. Marcus didn't answer right away. Inside the apartment behind him, the small living room lamp cast a soft amber glow across a modest space filled with everyday signs of real life. A worn couch, a small kitchen table with two mismatched chairs, a child's backpack hanging from the backrest. On the far wall, a second door stood slightly open, revealing a dim bedroom where a small night light shaped like a moon glowed softly. Marcus glanced back for a second before turning again to face the man at the door. Earlier that morning, Marcus Reed had walked out of Whitmore Technologies carrying a cardboard box with the few things he kept in his locker. A thermos, a pair of work gloves, a photo of his daughter Lily grinning with two missing front teeth at a Little League game. 12 years working in the building. 12 years fixing wiring, replacing filters, checking server room cooling systems, and making sure the lights stayed on long after executives had gone home. And by 5 o'clock that afternoon, Marcus Reed had no job. But that wasn't the part that kept replaying in Whitmore's mind all evening. The part he couldn't ignore was the sentence Marcus had said in the conference room before leaving. A sentence that now echoed louder than any quarterly report. Whitmore met Marcus's eyes again and spoke quietly. You warned them, he said. Marcus shrugged slightly. I told them something didn't look right. Whitmore nodded once, slow and deliberate. And tonight, he said, I found out you were the only one who noticed. The hallway fell silent again. Marcus folded his arms across his chest and studied the CEO's face carefully. So you drove across the city, Marcus said, to tell me that? Whitmore shook his head. No, he said. I came here because if what you found is as big as it looks, then you didn't just quit your job today. He paused for a moment before finishing the sentence. You may have just exposed the biggest mistake my company almost made. Marcus did not immediately respond to the CEO's words. Instead, he stepped slightly aside from the doorway and glanced back into the apartment again, his attention drawn for a moment to the quiet bedroom where the soft moon-shaped night light still glowed. From inside came the faint rhythmic sound of a small fan turning slowly on a dresser. Lily had always slept better with the gentle hum of it in the background. Marcus finally turned back and spoke quietly. We should keep our voices down. My daughter is asleep. Daniel Whitmore nodded once, lowering his voice without hesitation. The hallway light flickered again above them, casting a pale yellow glow over the worn carpet. For a moment, the contrast between the two men could not have been clearer. One stood in an expensive coat that probably cost more than a month of rent in this building. The other wore a faded gray sweatshirt and jeans that still carried faint dust from a long day of work that had ended hours earlier. Marcus leaned his shoulder against the doorframe again and studied Whitmore carefully. You said I exposed something, Marcus said. That sounds like a problem for your legal department. Whitmore exhaled slowly and looked down the quiet hallway before answering. My legal department spent 6 hours tonight trying to figure out how a server technician noticed something that 3 senior analysts and 2 executives completely missed. Marcus gave a small shrug. I am not a technician, he said. I fix air systems and wiring. But when you spend enough nights in a server room, you start noticing patterns. Whitmore watched him closely. What pattern did you notice? Marcus hesitated for a second, then reached behind the door and picked up an old tablet that rested on the small kitchen counter just inside the apartment. The screen lit up with a soft glow as he tapped it once. Cooling systems in the server room run a little harder during heavy processing, Marcus explained calmly. More data traffic means more heat. Yesterday around 3 in the morning the system temperature spiked for about 11 minutes. Whitmore listened without interrupting. Marcus continued. But there was no scheduled system test. No overnight analytics run. No backup cycle big enough to explain it. He turned the screen slightly so Whitmore could see the graph. So I checked the log files. Whitmore leaned closer, his expression sharpening. Marcus tapped another section of the screen. Someone pushed a financial transaction through a restricted channel. It was disguised inside routine system maintenance traffic. Whitmore's jaw tightened slightly. Amount. Marcus looked directly at him. $80 million. The number seemed to hang in the quiet hallway for a moment. Whitmore rubbed a hand slowly across his face as if the weight of the discovery had followed him all the way across the city. And when you reported it, Whitmore asked, they dismissed you. Marcus nodded once. They told me maintenance workers do not understand financial systems. Whitmore let out a short breath that almost sounded like a tired laugh. Apparently maintenance workers understand them better than the people signing the reports. Marcus did not smile. Instead, he set the tablet down again and folded his arms. So now you know, he said. Quietly. What happens next is your decision. Whitmore looked at him for several seconds, as though measuring the calm certainty in Marcus's voice. Down the hallway, a distant elevator door opened and closed somewhere on the floor below, the sound echoing faintly through the building. Finally, Whitmore spoke again. Marcus, he said carefully. Tonight, I had my entire board of directors in a room reviewing that transaction. He paused briefly before adding, and every single one of them asked the same question. Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. Whitmore met his gaze. Who was the man that caught it before anyone else did? Marcus did not answer the question right away. The hallway seemed even quieter now, as if the entire building had settled into the deep stillness that came after midnight. A car passed slowly outside on the street below, its headlights briefly sliding across the window at the far end of the corridor before disappearing again. Marcus rested one hand on the edge of the door and looked at Daniel Whitmore with the same calm expression he had carried all evening. That sounds like a boardroom problem, Marcus said quietly. Whitmore studied him carefully. The man standing in front of him did not look like someone seeking attention or recognition. If anything, Marcus looked like someone who would rather close the door and return to the quiet routine of his small apartment. Whitmore spoke again. They expected a name from the finance department, he said, or a cybersecurity analyst. Marcus shrugged lightly. You got a maintenance worker instead. Whitmore nodded slowly. That is exactly what surprised them. Marcus glanced once more toward the bedroom door behind him. The faint glow of the night light still painted a soft circle on the hallway floor inside the apartment. For a brief moment, Whitmore noticed something he had never paid attention to before in all his years running a company filled with thousands of employees. Marcus Reed was not thinking about a promotion. He was thinking about keeping the apartment quiet enough so a 6-year-old girl could sleep. Marcus folded his arms again. Look, he said calmly. I told the truth this morning. That was all I could do. After that, it was no longer my responsibility. Whitmore tilted his head slightly. You walked away very easily for someone who knew what that discovery could mean. Marcus let out a quiet breath. I did not walk away easily, he said. But sometimes the right thing costs you your job. Whitmore absorbed the words in silence. For a man who spent most of his time in conference rooms filled with confident voices and polished presentations, the simplicity of Marcus's explanation carried a weight he could not ignore. Whitmore finally asked the question that had been building in his mind since early evening. Why did you even check the logs? He asked. Marcus glanced toward the tablet on the counter again before answering. Because something felt off. Whitmore waited. Marcus continued. Cooling systems are like breathing. When the servers work harder, the temperature rises a little. It is predictable. Yesterday, the temperature spike lasted exactly 11 minutes. Whitmore nodded slowly. That was the hidden transfer window. Marcus met his eyes. Exactly. Whitmore shook his head in quiet disbelief. 3 analysts spent months reviewing those transaction systems. They never saw it. Marcus gave a small half-smile that carried no pride, only quiet certainty. Analysts look for numbers, he said. I look for patterns. Whitmore was silent for several seconds, letting that sentence settle. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly above them. Somewhere in the building pipes clicked softly as the heating system shifted for the night. Finally, Whitmore spoke again, his tone calmer but more serious than before. Marcus, he said, that transaction was scheduled to be approved tomorrow morning. Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. Whitmore continued. If that had happened, $80 million would have vanished into a chain of shell accounts that would take years to trace. Marcus did not react dramatically. He only nodded once. Then I guess it is a good thing someone noticed. Whitmore studied him again, this time with a different expression, one that carried a quiet respect he had not expected to feel when he drove to this building earlier that night. Marcus, Whitmore said slowly, you may have saved my company from the worst financial scandal in its history. Marcus remained leaning against the doorway, calm as ever. Maybe, he replied. Then, after a brief pause, he added, but that still does not explain why the chief executive officer of Whitmore Technologies is standing outside my apartment at midnight. Whitmore took a breath, as though the answer carried more weight than the conversation so far. He looked Marcus directly in the eye and said quietly, because the board does not just want to know who found the problem. He paused briefly before finishing the sentence. They want to know if that man is willing to come back and help us fix it. Marcus did not answer immediately. The words hung in the quiet hallway like a question that carried more weight than the late hour. He looked past Daniel Whitmore for a moment, down the dim corridor where the flickering fluorescent light buzzed softly above worn carpet that had probably been replaced 10 years too late. Then he looked back at the CEO standing in front of him, the man whose signature sat at the bottom of company emails Marcus had read for years, but whose voice he had only heard once before that morning in the conference room, where his job had quietly ended. Marcus shook his head slightly. You already had your chance to listen, he said calmly. Whitmore did not argue. Instead, he nodded once, as if he had expected the response. You are right, Whitmore said. And that is exactly why I am standing here. Marcus remained leaning against the doorway. The warm light from inside the apartment spilled into the hallway, revealing small details Whitmore had not noticed before. A pair of tiny sneakers near the couch. A pink backpack with cartoon patches hanging from a chair. A refrigerator door covered with drawings held up by magnets. One drawing in particular caught his attention for a moment. A stick figure man holding the hand of a smaller figure under a bright yellow sun. Above them were uneven letters written carefully in a child's handwriting. Dad and me. Whitmore looked away quietly and focused again on Marcus. The board reviewed the server logs tonight, Whitmore said. Every line of them. Marcus said nothing. Whitmore continued. We traced the hidden transaction to a series of internal approvals that should never have existed. Marcus raised one eyebrow slightly. Meaning someone inside your company helped move it. Whitmore nodded slowly. Someone very high up. The hallway seemed even quieter now. Marcus crossed his arms. And now you want the guy you fired this morning to come back and clean it up. Whitmore met his gaze without hesitation. I want the man who noticed the truth before anyone else to help us understand how deep it goes. Marcus studied him carefully. You have analysts, auditors, cybersecurity teams. Whitmore nodded. Yes, and they all missed it. Marcus let out a quiet breath. That still does not explain why you drove all the way across the city to my apartment. Whitmore paused for a moment before answering. When he spoke again, his voice carried something different than before. Not authority, not negotiation, something closer to honesty. Because tonight I realized something about the people in my company, he said slowly. Marcus waited. Whitmore continued. Some of them protect numbers. Some protect reputations. Very few protect the truth. Marcus tilted his head slightly. Whitmore looked directly at him. You walked into a room full of executives this morning and told them something they did not want to hear. Marcus shrugged again. I told them what the system showed. Whitmore nodded once. And you were willing to lose your job for it. Marcus glanced back toward the bedroom again, where the soft glow of the moon-shaped night light still shone through the doorway. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "My daughter watches everything I do," he said. "If I teach her that telling the truth costs too much, then I have already failed as a father." Whitmore absorbed the sentence in silence. Outside on the street below, a distant siren echoed briefly and faded away into the night. Finally, Whitmore spoke again. "Marcus," he said carefully, "if you are right about what you found, the board will open a full investigation by morning." Marcus nodded slowly. Whitmore continued, "And when that happens, every person involved in approving that transaction will try to protect themselves." Marcus looked back at him. Whitmore finished quietly. "Which means the only person in this situation who has nothing to hide might also be the only one who can help us see the entire picture." Marcus studied him for a long moment. The silence between them stretched until the hum of the hallway light seemed louder than before. Then Marcus finally asked the question that mattered most to him. "And if I help you," he said calmly, "what happens to the man you fired this morning?" Whitmore did not hesitate this time. "That mistake," he said quietly, "is the first thing I intend to fix." Marcus looked at Daniel Whitmore for a long moment without speaking. The quiet hallway seemed to stretch around them like a pause that neither man wanted to rush. The fluorescent light above flickered once again, casting a dull hum that echoed faintly against the old ceiling tiles. Marcus shifted his weight slightly against the doorframe and glanced back toward the bedroom where the soft moon-shaped night light still glowed. The steady hum of the small fan continued inside the room, gentle and constant. Lily had always said the sound reminded her of ocean waves, even though she had never actually seen the ocean. Marcus turned back to Whitmore and studied the man's face carefully. The chief executive officer of Whitmore Technologies stood there patiently, not checking a phone, not looking impatient, not acting like the leader of a billion-dollar company with meetings scheduled every 15 minutes. He simply waited. Marcus finally spoke. "You said the board will start an investigation in the morning," he said calmly. Whitmore nodded once. "Yes." Marcus crossed his arms slowly. "Then by morning everyone involved will already know something is wrong." Whitmore did not disagree. "Most likely," Marcus continued, "which means the moment that investigation begins, people will start protecting themselves." Whitmore looked at him with quiet attention. Marcus gestured lightly toward the tablet resting on the kitchen counter. "Logs disappear. Files get adjusted. Stories start changing." Whitmore nodded slowly. "That is exactly what we are worried about." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "So the real question is not whether I noticed the problem," he said. "The real question is whether the truth still exists by the time your investigation begins." Whitmore remained silent for a few seconds, letting the weight of that sentence settle in the quiet hallway. Finally he said, "That is why I came here tonight." Marcus raised an eyebrow. Whitmore continued, "Right now only 3 people know the full extent of what the logs revealed. Myself, the board chairman, and the man who discovered it." Marcus did not react dramatically. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if confirming a simple equation. "Meaning the window is still open." Whitmore gave a small nod. "Exactly." Marcus looked down for a moment, thinking. The hallway remained silent except for the distant sound of a truck passing somewhere on the street below. When he looked back up, his expression had shifted slightly, more focused now. If the transfer moved through a maintenance channel, then someone had access to internal system routing. Whitmore listened carefully. Marcus continued, "That means whoever approved it knew exactly how to hide inside routine operations." Whitmore folded his hands loosely in front of him. "Our analysts reached the same conclusion tonight." Marcus nodded once. "Then the person behind it has been studying your system for a long time." Whitmore's expression hardened slightly. "Yes." Marcus leaned back against the doorframe again. "And someone like that will not wait for an investigation." Whitmore met his gaze. "Which means time matters." Marcus exhaled slowly and glanced once more toward the bedroom door. For a moment, he seemed to weigh something far beyond the conversation in the hallway. When he finally spoke again, his voice was calm but deliberate. "If I help you," he said, "I do not just help your company." Whitmore waited. Marcus finished the thought quietly. "I stepped back into the middle of something that could become very complicated." Whitmore nodded without hesitation. "I understand." Marcus looked directly at him. "Do you?" Whitmore answered immediately. "Yes." Marcus studied his face carefully, searching for even the smallest sign of hesitation. Instead, he saw only quiet certainty. Whitmore spoke again. "Marcus, When you walked into that conference room this morning, you chose integrity over comfort. Marcus said nothing. Whitmore continued. Tonight, I am asking you to make the same choice again. The hallway light buzzed softly above them as Marcus considered the words. Finally, he asked one simple question. If I come back, he said calmly, do I come back as the maintenance worker you fired this morning? Whitmore shook his head slowly. No, Marcus waited. Whitmore met his eyes and said quietly, you come back as the man who helps us uncover the truth. Marcus did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked past Daniel Whitmore again and down the quiet hallway, as if measuring the weight of the moment. Midnight had settled fully over the building now. The distant sounds of the city had softened to the occasional passing car and the low rumble of traffic somewhere far beyond the neighborhood. The fluorescent light above them buzzed softly, flickering once before stabilizing again. Marcus slowly uncrossed his arms and stepped back into the apartment just far enough to reach the kitchen counter. He picked up the old tablet and held it for a moment, the faint glow reflecting in his eyes. Then he turned the screen off and placed it down again as if the device itself carried. A decision he had not fully made yet. Daniel Whitmore remained in the hallway, patient and still, giving Marcus the space to think. Inside the apartment, the warm light illuminated the small details of a life built carefully over time. A stack of school papers sat neatly on the corner of the table. A plastic lunchbox rested beside a half-empty glass of milk that had probably been forgotten earlier that evening. Marcus glanced toward the bedroom again and listened for a moment. The small fan continued its steady rhythm. Lily was still asleep. Only then did Marcus step back to the doorway. If I walk back into that building tomorrow, he said quietly, I do not walk in as someone you can ignore again. Whitmore nodded without hesitation. You have my word. Marcus tilted his head slightly. Your word matters less than your authority. Whitmore gave a faint, understanding smile. Then you will have that as well. Marcus studied him carefully. For years he had passed executives in polished suits moving through the bright lobby of Whitmore Technologies without ever exchanging more than a polite nod. Those people lived in a different world. But the man standing in the hallway tonight did not look like someone protected by distance or titles. He looked like someone who had spent the last several hours realizing that the system he trusted had nearly collapsed without warning. Marcus finally spoke again. The person behind that transfer knew how to hide inside operational traffic, he said. Whitmore listened closely. Marcus continued. That means they understand the infrastructure almost as well as the engineers who built it. Whitmore nodded slowly. Our analysts believe the same thing. Marcus rested one hand lightly against the doorframe. Then whoever did this will not wait to see what your investigation finds. Whitmore answered quietly. No, they will try to get ahead of it. Marcus looked directly at him. Which means the first 24 hours matter more than the next 24 days. Whitmore's eyes sharpened slightly as the sentence landed. You think evidence could disappear that quickly? Marcus gave a small shrug. In a digital system, it can disappear faster. Whitmore absorbed the thought. The hallway felt even smaller now, as though the quiet space between them had become the center of something much larger than either of them expected. After a moment, Whitmore asked, if you were in my position tonight, what would you do first? Marcus considered the question carefully. When he spoke again, his voice carried the calm certainty of someone who had already spent hours thinking about it earlier that day. I would not start by asking who approved the transfer, he said. Whitmore waited. Marcus continued. I would start by asking who had the knowledge to hide it. Whitmore nodded slowly. Marcus added one more thought. Because the person who built the hiding place is usually the same person who plans to use it again. The sentence hung quietly in the air between them. Whitmore looked at Marcus with a new level of attention now, not as a former employee, not even as someone who had noticed a technical anomaly, but as someone who understood the deeper pattern behind it. Finally, Whitmore spoke again. Then come back with me in the morning, he said quietly. Marcus looked past him once more toward the empty hallway before answering. I will come back, he said. Then, after a brief pause, he added calmly. But tomorrow we do not start with the transaction. Whitmore waited. Marcus met his eyes. Tomorrow we start with the person who designed the shadow around it. Daniel Whitmore remained standing in the hallway for another few seconds after Marcus spoke those words. The building was quiet enough now that the faint hum of electricity behind the fluorescent light could be heard clearly, along with the distant ticking of a wall clock somewhere inside another apartment. Whitmore studied Marcus carefully, as if committing the moment to memory. Then he gave a slow nod. "Tomorrow morning," he said quietly. Marcus did not answer with more words. Instead, he stepped back slightly and closed the apartment door halfway, signaling that the conversation had reached its natural end. Whitmore understood the gesture immediately. 7:30. Whitmore added before turning toward the elevator at the end of the hallway. "I will have a car waiting downstairs." Marcus simply nodded once and gently closed the door. The soft click of the lock echoed faintly in the small apartment. For a moment Marcus stood still in the quiet living room. The warm light from the lamp cast long shadows across the floor, touching the drawings on the refrigerator and the small sneakers near the couch. Marcus walked slowly toward the bedroom and looked inside. Lily slept peacefully, beneath a pale blue blanket, her small hand resting near the edge of the pillow. The steady hum of the fan continued beside the bed. Marcus stood there for a few seconds, watching the calm rise and fall of her breathing. Then he quietly closed the bedroom door again and returned to the kitchen table. He sat down and turned the tablet back on. The screen glowed softly as the server logs appeared again, rows of timestamps and system activity stretching across the display. Marcus studied the graph of cooling system activity one more time. 11 minutes. Exactly 11 minutes. Whoever had designed the transfer window had calculated it carefully. Just long enough to move $80 million through internal maintenance traffic. Just short enough to avoid triggering automatic alerts. Marcus leaned back slightly and folded his arms, his mind moving through the patterns again. The shadow around the transaction had not appeared by accident. Someone inside Whitmore Technologies had built that shadow intentionally. Someone who understood the infrastructure deeply enough to hide inside it. Marcus reached forward and highlighted a small section of the log. There, a routing request that did not belong. Subtle, almost invisible, but once noticed, it stood out clearly. Marcus leaned closer to the screen. The routing signature carried an internal authorization key, not a technician key, not a system maintenance key, an executive-level access signature. Marcus stared at the code for several seconds before slowly turning the tablet off again. The apartment grew quiet once more. Outside the window, a streetlight cast a pale orange glow across the empty parking lot below. Marcus walked to the sink and rinsed the last plate that had been sitting there from dinner. The water ran softly as he placed the dish in the rack. Tomorrow morning the investigation would begin. Executives would gather in glass conference rooms. Lawyers would start reviewing documents. Analysts would search through reports trying to understand how something so large had slipped through unnoticed. But Marcus already understood something they did not. Whoever had hidden that transaction believed the system would protect them. They believed the shadow they created would remain invisible. Marcus turned off the kitchen light and walked quietly down the hallway toward the bedroom. Before entering, he paused once more and looked back toward the living room where the tablet rested on the table. The truth was already there, waiting. And by morning someone inside Whitmore Technologies was going to realize that the shadow they trusted was beginning to disappear. Morning arrived quietly over the city, the pale gray light of early dawn stretching slowly across the apartment windows. Marcus woke before the alarm, the habit of early shifts still guiding his body even after the long night. For a moment he lay still, listening. The small fan hummed steadily in Lily's room, and somewhere outside a delivery truck rolled past on the street below. Marcus sat up and rubbed his eyes before glancing at the clock on the nightstand. 6:15. He moved carefully so the floorboards would not creak and walked into the kitchen, starting the coffee maker with the familiar routine he had followed every morning for years. The smell of fresh coffee soon filled the small apartment. A few minutes later, Lily shuffled sleepily into the kitchen wearing her soft blue pajamas, her hair slightly tangled from the night. She looked up at Marcus with a quiet smile. "Are you going to work today, Dad?" she asked softly. Marcus knelt down so they were eye level. "Yes," he said gently. "I have something important to help with." Lily nodded in the thoughtful way children sometimes do when they sense something serious even if they do not fully understand it. Marcus packed her lunch while she ate cereal at the table, the morning sunlight slowly brightening the drawings taped to the refrigerator door. By 7:20 the apartment was quiet again as Lily waited for the school bus outside with her backpack and lunchbox. Marcus watched from the window until the bus pulled away down the street. Then he turned back inside, put on a clean shirt, and picked up the tablet from the table. At exactly 7:30, a dark sedan pulled up in front of the building. Marcus stepped outside into the cool morning air and saw Daniel Whitmore standing beside the car, already dressed in a tailored suit that matched the confidence expected from a chief executive officer. Whitmore opened the back door and nodded once. The drive across the city passed in thoughtful silence. The skyline grew larger through the windshield as downtown approached, glass towers catching the early sunlight. When the car stopped in front of the Whitmore Technologies headquarters, employees were already entering the building, unaware that inside the executive floors a quiet storm was about to begin. Marcus stepped out of the car and looked up at the tall building he had walked into for 12 years through the side maintenance entrance. Today Whitmore led him through the front doors instead. Inside the lobby, the polished marble floors reflected the morning light, and the quiet hum of business activity surrounded them. Several employees glanced curiously at Marcus as he followed the CEO toward the elevators reserved for executive access. When the doors opened on the top floor, the atmosphere felt different from the calm lobby below. Assistants moved quickly through the hallway carrying folders, and the low murmur of tense conversations drifted from the conference rooms. Whitmore stopped in front of a large glass door where several members of the board of directors were already seated around a long table. He turned to Marcus before entering. "Everything begins now," Whitmore said quietly. Marcus nodded once. Inside the room, the directors looked up as the door opened, their attention shifting immediately toward the man standing beside the CEO. Whitmore stepped forward and addressed the room with steady clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "this is Marcus Reed." The room remained silent as several curious faces studied him. Whitmore continued calmly. "He is the one who discovered the transaction none of us saw." Marcus stepped forward to the table, placing the tablet gently on the polished surface. The screen lit up with the server logs once again. He looked around the room at the executives who held the power of the company in their hands. Then he spoke quietly. "If we want to find the truth," he said, "we should begin with the place where someone tried hardest to hide it." The conference room remained quiet after Marcus finished speaking. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall glass windows behind the board members, casting long reflections across the polished table. For a few seconds no one moved. Several executives exchanged brief glances as if trying to understand how a man who had worked in the maintenance department for more than a decade had suddenly become the most important voice in the room. Marcus tapped the tablet gently, and the server log expanded across the screen. Rows of timestamps, routing commands, and system activity filled the display. "The transaction itself is not the most interesting part," Marcus said calmly. "The shadow around it is." One of the board members leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean by shadow?" Marcus pointed to the section of the log where the temperature spike had occurred. "The cooling system told the truth before the financial reports did," he explained. "Server temperature increased for 11 minutes during the transfer window. That means the system was processing something heavy that was never scheduled." Another executive frowned slightly. "But our monitoring software should have flagged that." Marcus nodded. "It would have if the transaction had traveled through normal financial channels." He tapped the screen again and zoomed in on the routing path. Instead, it traveled through a maintenance network lane that is normally used for infrastructure diagnostics. The room grew quieter as the meaning began to settle in. Whitmore watched the board members carefully while Marcus continued. "Someone inside the company knew exactly where the blind spots were," Marcus said. "They knew which system activity would look normal and which activity would trigger alarms." A senior director folded his hands slowly. "Are you suggesting this was done by someone with internal system authority?" Marcus met his eyes calmly. "Yes." Another board member spoke cautiously. "Do you know who?" Marcus did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned the tablet slightly so the group could see a highlighted section of the code. "This routing authorization key does not belong to the maintenance department," he said. "It belongs to executive network access." A murmur moved quietly through the room. Whitmore stepped closer to the table. "Which means someone at the executive level approved the channel used to move the funds," he said. Marcus nodded once. "Or someone with the ability to create an authorization signature that looks like it came from an executive account." One of the directors leaned back slowly in his chair. "And if that person still has access to the system?" Marcus answered calmly. "Then they could attempt another transfer once the first one is blocked." Whitmore looked around the room. "Which is why we are locking system routing access immediately after this meeting." Marcus added one final detail. There is something else. The room grew still again. Marcus tapped the screen one more time. A second timestamp appeared beside the first. The transfer was not just hidden, he said. It was tested. Whitmore frowned slightly. Tested? Marcus nodded. 3 days earlier, there was a smaller routing attempt through the same shadow channel. One of the executives leaned forward. How much? Marcus answered quietly. $200,000. The board members exchanged uneasy looks. Marcus continued. That was the rehearsal. Whitmore slowly exhaled as the full picture became clear. Someone inside the company had not only built the shadow path through the system, but had practiced using it before attempting the larger transfer. Whitmore turned toward Marcus with a steady expression. Then the next question is simple, he said. Marcus looked back at him. Whitmore finished the thought. Who had the knowledge to design that shadow in the first place? Marcus glanced at the executives around the table before answering. The person who built the system architecture 5 years ago. The room fell silent again as several directors immediately understood the implication. Whitmore stood still for a moment before speaking quietly. Then we know exactly where to begin. Marcus nodded once, calm and steady, as the investigation that would reshape the future of Whitmore Technologies officially began.